Bismillah, bir ben bana bir benden, benden bir ben bana.
Welcome to the Sufi Heart podcast with Omid Safi, featuring teachings and stories from the wisdom of the Islamic tradition. Omid invites you to a meditation on the transformative power of love and recalling the necessity of healing our own hearts through healing the world. If you'd like to support Omid's podcast, please visit BeHereNowNetwork.com/Omid.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Sufi Heart podcast. I'm very delighted to get to share with you a very special episode for today. We have oftentimes spoken about this beautiful path of radical love. And we've also talked about how it's epitomized in great sages like Rumi and Hafiz and others. And in more contemporary teachers like Hazrat Inayat Khan. And we've already done one episode on the teachings of Hazrat Inayat Khan. But what I wanted to do for today is that there's a very beautiful encapsulation, a summary, a distilling to the core of the Sufi path that is referred to as the path of love, harmony, and beauty. Love, harmony, and beauty. And so in this episode, I want to invite you to join us on a deep dive inside these teachings. And I'm very delighted that of how this conversation turned out. I was invited by some friends to give these teachings. It was the Spiritual Wanderlust community. I invite you to check them out, and I've included some lists there for them. And so this is a short snippet from that larger conversation. And if these kinds of things speak to your heart, feel free to join us on the retreats and the programs that we have through illuminatedcourses.com. So sit back, grab yourself a nice cup of tea, and join us on this conversation to the heart of love, harmony, and beauty. Thank you so much. Thank you, friends, and it's a great pleasure to be with you, and I am honored and delighted to have the opportunity to share these teachings. And my deep gratitude to our friends for having convened us and to create an opportunity to talk about the spiritual and contemplative teachings of one of the great souls who has been sent to Europe and North America, Hazrat Inayat Khan. When he was a young man, he lived a relatively short life, just about 45 years. It's extraordinary to think about people who, in a short lifetime, end up having such an extraordinary impact on humanity. You think about Christ in 33 years, Dr. King and Malcolm X in 39 years, and Hazrat Inayat Khan just about 45 years. When he was a young man, and at that time more known as a supremely gifted musician, rather than yet being known for who he truly was, which was a luminous sage, his spiritual mentor, his spiritual teacher, Abu Hashem Madani, a South Asian, Indian, Muslim mystic, gave him a simple mission. And it was, go west, young man, and unite the East and the West through the gift of your music. unite the East and the West through the gift of your music. As Nicole mentioned, you look around the world today, and of course, there's a great deal of disharmony. We see it inside our own country here in the United States of America. You see it all around the world. And indeed, the inner world and the outer world oftentimes serve as mirrors of one another. And so the chaos and the turmoil that we see externally is also mirrored internally. We see individually, as families and as communities, a lot of us who are struggling to lead the kind of lives that we would like to. So that teaching of bringing the message of this contemplative tradition is one that was timely in Hazrat Inayat Khan's age. He lived in the very painful time of the colonial era. Nowadays, it cannot be an easy experience for many refugees, many immigrants, to find themselves arriving in a place that sometimes is less than hospitable. And it was even more so 120 years ago in the times of Inayat Khan. So his message had to be timely, but it also had to be timeless. And that balance is really one that has been at the heart of Hazrat Inayat Khan's offering. How do we tap into teachings that are universal, that are timeless, that are ancient, that transcend the particular limitations of individual cultures and ethnicities, languages, even perhaps religious traditions, and at the same time, they answer the call of the day, that they have something to say about the crises in which we find ourselves. That balance of being timely and timeless is one of the things that draws me so much to the teachings of Hazrat Inayat Khan. I mentioned already that he was a supremely gifted musician. And at the time that he arrives in Europe and North America, there were many doors that were closed to a dark-skinned Indian Muslim spiritual teacher. But one of the doors that was open to him was the door of music. And so there were many occasions in which people were hesitant and reluctant to hear the message of spirituality and mysticism and contemplative traditions, but they were willing to listen to a supremely gifted musician and vocalist. And so he taught oftentimes through that very sweet blend of spirituality and music. This is, of course, not new to many of you, many of us. We're familiar with traditions of sacred music, whether it is gospel, whether it is the Qawwali tradition in India. I sometimes think about Coltrane's Love Supreme. Coltrane, of course, was himself very deeply influenced by Hazrat Inayat Khan. His wife was herself a Muslim, and the teachings of Inayat Khan were known in many of the jazz circles of the 60s. So we know about the tradition of sacred music, but in the Sufi tradition, in the mystical tradition of Islam, there has been for about 1,000 years a recognition that what we mean by music is not simply banging on a drum or plucking away at a string. That music is inherently spiritual. Music is unseen. You cannot see the notes, but you can feel the impact in your heart. And the mystics of the Sufi tradition for more than 1,000 years had also had a recognition that what we experience as sacred music here on earth is something celestial. That music is really the sound of the movement of heavens. Everything that moves creates a certain sound, and that sacred music on earth is the very sound of the movement of heavenly spheres. That music is heavenly. And Hazrat Inayat Khan identifies the heart of his message as a message of love, harmony, and beauty. Love, harmony, and beauty. And I want to take a moment to talk about these three components. Love, which is ubiquitous in the mystical traditions. No tradition possesses a monopoly over love. Love is not a uniquely Christian virtue or an Islamic virtue or a Buddhist virtue. Love is simply divine. In the same way that we might have a tendency, I'm located on the East Coast of the United States, and if I were to drive for just a few minutes, I would end up at the shore of a magnificent ocean, and we call that the Atlantic. As far as my eye can see, there's the Atlantic Ocean. And yet, if a friend of mine were standing on the shores of India and looking out, they would see the Indian Ocean. And perhaps some of our friends who are helping to produce this program, I think they're in Oregon, if they were to go to the shore and look westward, they would see the Pacific Ocean. And we give different names to these oceans, the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian, and so on. But they're all water. And all of the oceans are connected. And in fact, all of the oceans are ultimately one. So the human mind has a tendency to divide and to categorize. But the mystic temperament recognizes the particularity and is able to move inward into the symbolic, is able to discern the underlying unity. So this is what the Sufis call to see the unity in the multiplicity and the multiplicity in the unity. The one in the many and the many in the one. And it's that same way with love. When Hazrat Inayat Khan speaks about love, he is not simply talking about a vague, sentimental notion. He comes out of a rich Sufi, South Asian, Islamic tradition, which we identify as Mazhab-e-Ishq, the path of radical love. And the path of radical love makes an extraordinary claim. And the claim is fundamentally the notion that there is no ultimate divide between the love of God and the love of creation. That love is one. And actually, to take it even one step further, that love is not merely and simply a quality of God. That love is God. It is the very being of God. It's the very essence of God. It's the very heart of God. And he identifies this through many of his beautiful, beautiful teachings, which he expresses in a poetic fashion. So I'm going to read for you a short poem where Hazrat Inayat Khan is speaking in a first-person voice about his experience of love. And then we're going to carry on and continue with harmony and beauty. Do note when you're reading this poem, the way in which Inayat Khan is not speaking about love merely as a kind of romantic love, right? This is one of the great mistakes and errors that we oftentimes make in the West, is that we have taken the vast canopy of love, the rainbow of love, and we've really narrowly reduced it to romantic, physical, even sexual love. The Sufis are pushing back against it, and they're thinking of love in the widest and most expansive sense. It could be romantic love, but it could also be the love of a parent, the love of a child, perhaps most importantly, the love of a friend, of a fellow spiritual seeker, the love of a neighbor, the one that we would do quite well to remember nowadays, the love of a stranger, the love of an animal, the love of cats and dogs and birds, butterflies, earthworms, the love of trees and the breeze. So it's really coming up with the grandest, widest model of love, put together all of the loves in the world, and that is God. So this is the poem that Hazrat Inayat Khan composes. And again, think about how often, particularly again in the West, we tend to think of the mystical tradition, the contemplative tradition, as one which has the goal of making your life happier, better. We even think about the mystical tradition kind of more or less in the genre of, if you would, self-help. And, all of us have seen advertising for different spiritual programs and offerings. Sign up for this weekend and you will have more happiness in your life. It'll make you richer in life. Well, the Sufis made no such promises. The Sufis understood that the life in this world is a combination of light and darkness, that the very same set of eyes and ears and heart that experience the joy of welcoming a child into this world will someday also have to bury a loved one. And so, far from simply promising, follow this 12-step program and you will never know pain in your life, the only thing that they promise you is take a step on this path and you will never walk alone. That the same God of love, who is the God of the mountaintop, is also the God of the valley bottom. That through the shattering of the heart and the expansion of the soul, you will be accompanied by the eternal beloved. So this is the offering of Hazrat Inayat Khan. He says, I have loved in life and I have been loved. I have drunk the bowl of poison from the hands of love as nectar and have been raised above life's joy and sorrow. My heart, aflame in love, set afire every heart that came in touch with it. My heart has been rent and joined again. My heart has been broken and again made whole. My heart has been wounded and healed again. 1,000 deaths my heart has died, and thanks be to love, it lives yet. I went through hell and saw there love's raging fire, and I entered heaven illumined with the light of love. I wept in love and made all weep with me. I mourned in love and pierced the hearts of men. And when my fiery glance fell on the rocks burst forth as volcanoes. The whole world sank in the flood caused by my one tear. With my deep sigh, the earth trembled. And when I cried aloud the name of my beloved, I shook the throne of God in heaven. I bowed my head low in humility, and on my knees I begged of love. Disclose to me, I pray thee, O love, thy secret. She took me gently by my arms and lifted me above the earth and spoke softly in my ear. My dear one, thou thyself are love, are lover, and thyself are the beloved whom thou hast adored. So we're really seeing something quite extraordinary here. This notion that it's not simply love as a kind of mere sentimentality, that ultimately in love, when we have gone through the heartaches and being made whole again, the ultimate unity is that of love, lover, and beloved. If we wanted to borrow a term from our Christian friends, you could really speak about this as a kind of Trinity. It's the unity in Trinity. So often we speak about love as something that we do or we offer somebody else. I love you. So won't you also love me? And many of us have had this experience of, with 1,000 trepidation, stating our intention to someone about our feelings for them. And you pause and you wait and you hold your breath to see how they respond. But that kind of love is still one that operates on the level of duality, of I and you. The Sufis, the mystics of Islam with this universal reach, they work a little differently. So the great Rumi, whom Hazrat Inayat Khan knew intimately, he has a beautiful poem that he says, "You and I should live as if you and I never heard of a you and an I." You and I should live as if you and I never heard of a you and an I. And then now start to think about this love, not merely on a human realm, but really as also the ultimate path towards God. What if we came to see love as the very unleashing of God on earth? This is, in fact, the statement of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that Hazrat Inayat Khan loves to quote. And the very first thing we hear from God is the statement, I was a hidden treasure. I was a hidden treasure, and I loved to be intimately known. The whole purpose of creation erupts out of this divine desire to be known intimately. The one who loves is God. The one who is loved is God. And love itself is God. So this contemplative, this mystical tradition is really moving us way beyond the kind of duality of the common Descartesian, Cartesian mindset of subject and object. I think, therefore I am. It calls for a unitive experience. That's where the mystics of so many traditions come to share a commonality. The Sufis love to quote this statement from the Quran: sights do not perceive God, but God perceives the sights. And Meister Eckhart, that great Christian mystic, says, the eye by which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. What if we came to see each one of our faculties not as perpetuating a subject-object dichotomy, but each one of them becomes a portal, that the eyes are an opening, and you see and you are seen. So the contemplative practices that Hazrat Inayat Khan introduces to the West, each one of them is designed to transform our human faculties to open them up, to make them more porous, more luminous, to take the manyness of experience and draw them within to that realm of unity, where the eye of the external senses leads you to the eye of the heart. The ears that hear all the sounds lead you to the listening through the heart, and so on. Love, harmony, and beauty. Harmony, it's deliberately a musical term, which is that tradition in which Hazrat Inayat Khan is so beautifully rooted. He identifies the task of the seeker, the spiritual seeker, as in fact being one of attuning the spiritual seeker. The task of the guide is to attune your soul. It's almost like each one of us is a musical instrument, is a magnificent musical instrument. You're just a little out of tune. The spiritual guide does not insist that you necessarily only follow through them. You have your own instrument, but you have to discover your own instrument. You have to uncover it. You have to fine-tune it. And he uses lots of different analogies for how this process works. In one of his sweeter metaphors, he says, the spiritual guide performs the role of Cupid in bringing the seeking souls closer to God. The spiritual guide attunes your soul and is the Cupid, is the matchmaker, bringing your soul closer to the one who's already close. That harmony, that musical term, if you go to a symphony, you want to make sure that this string instrument and the percussions are working together to create a sound which is lovelier than any one of those instruments alone. How lovely would the symphony of creation be if we operated in harmony? Today, of course, we are acutely aware of what disharmony looks like at a political level, at a national level, India and Pakistan and Kashmir, Palestine and Israel, the Rohingya, Sudan, Congo. There's really no end to it, it seems. From another point of view, you think about the human realm and the wider natural realm. What does our harmony look like? What does it mean if we live in a disharmonious state, which is not sustainable and has catastrophic consequences for our very survival? And then, what does harmony look like within each one of us? Each one of us, as the poet says, contains multitudes. You have your physical self, you have an emotional self, you have an intellectual self, you have a spiritual self, you have your contemplative inner life, and then you have a life as a member of a family, as a member of a community, as a member of the human community, as a member of creation. Think about the disharmony that ensues if we devote ourselves exclusively to satisfying our physical self, gluttony, to the neglect of our ethical responsibilities towards our fellow human beings, and living in harmony with nature. So Hazrat Inayat Khan, again, puts that as succinctly and beautifully as can be. And he expresses this relationship of harmony as being one of the keys that connects the human realm to the divine realm. And he says the following: the heart closed to humanity means the heart closed to God. The heart closed to humanity means the heart closed to God. And it's interesting. If you think about it, quite often what people talk about is not that their heart is completely closed to all humanity, but they insist on having certain borders, boundaries, checkpoints. I love the ones who live in my neighborhood and not much further. I love the ones who live under the protection of my political party and not much further. I love the ones who live under the flag of my nation and not much further. I love the people who bear my color skin, or I love the ones who pray the way that I do and not much further. Hazrat Inayat Khan says, if your heart is closed to a portion of humanity, then your heart is closed to a portion of God. So each one of us, individually and collectively, is being invited to think about who are the human beings and the communities who collectively, not on the basis of anything that they do, but simply on the basis of who they are, that we have somehow ended up closing our hearts to. I think if we're being honest with ourselves, all of us do have some communities that we have a harder time opening our hearts to. So this is the prayer that he offers, identifying God as the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty. The perfection of love, harmony, and beauty. He learned English at a later point in life. That was not his first language. And in the common manner of that day, it was the Queen's English. So, you'll hear a little bit of thous and thys in that very elegant Victorian language. But out of respect for him and the language that he used, I will simply read it in his way. It is kind of a King Jamesian language. So he addresses God as the following: O thou who art the perfection of love, harmony, and beauty, the Lord of the heaven and earth, open our hearts that we may hear thy voice, which constantly cometh from within. Open our hearts that we may hear thy voice, which constantly cometh from within. Disclose to us thy divine light, which is hidden in our souls, that we may know and understand life better. Most merciful and compassionate God, give us thy great goodness. Teach us thy loving forgiveness. Raise us above the distinctions and differences which divide men. Send us the peace of thy divine Spirit, and unite us all in thy perfect being. Amen. I want to point out a couple of things about this beautiful passage. He addresses God as the very perfection of love, harmony, and beauty. God is the perfection of love, the perfection of harmony, and the perfection of beauty. Of course, on earth we see beauty. The beauty of a rose, the beauty of a sunrise, beauty of dolphins swimming in the ocean, beauty of a laughter of a child. And if you pull them all together, the perfection of all beauty, perfection of all love, perfection of all harmony, that is God. Open our hearts. There's some recognition that we have work to do, that our hearts are not as open as they can be, so that we can hear your voice, which is constantly coming from within. God did not stop speaking with Christ and the Buddha and Muhammad, peace be upon them all. The divine voice continues to reverberate through the universe. Disclose to us thy divine light, which is hidden in our souls. Every single one of us has the light of God hidden in us. You are the most merciful and compassionate God. So grant us thy great goodness. Teach us thy loving forgiveness. This is interesting. Raise us above the distinctions and differences. Us. He's not saying, let us do away with distinctions and differences. The very particularities of the human community are precious, are beautiful. Just as the beauty of the Sahara and the beauty of the Himalayas and the beauty of a forest and the beauty of an ocean are all distinct. What is it that we're asked to be raised above? The distinctions and differences which divide us. Let us appreciate the particularity, but not keep them as a way that divide us against one another. Send us the peace of thy divine Spirit, and unite us all in thy perfect being. So there's a task of harmony, harmony with creation, harmony with one another, harmony with God, a harmony that calls upon the creative realm, the aesthetic realm, the musical realm. And this quest begins within. That's why it's a contemplative tradition. He has a beautiful and powerful poem. The contemplative path is not a hermit's path. It is intended to transform the way that we live together as members of a human community, in fact, as members of creation. And the mystics, more than perhaps anyone, are aware of the fact that creation is vast. A few weeks ago, I was on the edge of the Sahara in Africa. We were in one of our retreat programs that we go to every year in Morocco. And I was running my hand through the sand and picking it up and watching it fall back down to the ground. And I looked, and as far as my eye could see, there were these sand dunes. And I kept looking at the grains of sand that were stuck to my hand. And I remembered that if every grain of sand on my hand was a galaxy, there are more galaxies in the universe than there are grains of sand in the Sahara. The vastness of the universe is beyond that which we can fathom. And Hazrat Inayat Khan says, and the inner universe is even more vast. It kind of helps put your problems in perspective. When you think about the vastness of the inner world and the outer world, and yet, you are not insignificant. You are extraordinarily intended, desired, loved, purposeful. The Sufis always recall this example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he is standing in front of the Kaaba, the house of God that Abraham built. And he addresses the house of God, and he says, how beautiful and luminous and fragrant you are. But by the one in whose hand is my soul, I swear to God, that the life of every single human is more precious to God than even you are. And that the worth of a human soul, if we truly know not even who you are, but what you are more precious to God than any temple, any church, any mosque. And that's what Hazrat Inayat Khan also talks about, the ultimate site to search for God. He is, of course, rooted in a specific religious tradition. He comes from this ancient and rich Muslim, South Asian, contemplative, mystical tradition. But it's like a wide tree that is rooted in a specific soil, but has this vast canopy that stretches out so that lots of people far away from those roots can reach for the succulent fruit that this tradition has to offer. And that's especially the case for him, since he was sent as a way of bringing the message of love, harmony, and beauty to places far beyond his homeland. So this message of searching for God within is one that he quotes in a beautiful book of his called the Gayan, and I'll read this for you. I searched and searched and searched, and I could not find thee anywhere. So he's addressing God. I searched and searched and searched, and I could not find thee anywhere. I called thee aloud, standing on the minaret. The minaret is where the call to prayer for Muslims is given from. I rang the temple bell with the rising and the setting of the sun. I bathed in the Ganges in vain, as the Hindus do. I came back from Kaaba disappointed. I looked for thee in heaven, my beloved, my pearl. But at last, I have found thee hidden in the shell of my heart. This is a very classic approach within the Sufi tradition. And it's one that we have to sit with. We want to approach this with a measure of respect and curiosity. Nowadays, of course, for all the reasons that are understandable to so many of us, we have a large contingent of us who have been frustrated and disappointed with what we might term organized religion, institutionalized religion. And we might even make some jokes about other institutions where less than well people are sent. So one of the fastest growing groups of self-identifying people spiritually in the West are people who call themselves spiritual, not religious. It's a kind of free agent spirituality. And it's tempting when you read statements like this. I couldn't find God in a mosque or a church or a temple or in the Ganges, but I found God within my own heart. To say, well, there you go. We don't need any religious traditions. I'm not so sure that that's precisely what Hazrat Inayat Khan was talking about. What he's talking about is a notion of not settling for the external paraphernalia of religion, but rather diving within. If you go to the ocean, the part of the ocean that reaches the shore is oftentimes quite filled with waves. And the water, because of that tumult, might have scum, might have foam in that tumultuous part. But if you dive into the deep part of the ocean, where the great silence lies, that is where the pearls are to be found. That has been always the message of the Sufis. I'm scheduled next month to take a contemplative journey of friends to Turkey. You all would be invited to join us. There's a beautiful mosque in Bursa that is filled with exquisite calligraphy. It's probably the best place in the world to see sacred writing as it was intended to be seen. And there's one enormous panel above a door frame that says, God oceanically wraps around you from the behind. God, Allahu min waraihim mohit. God wraps around you like an ocean from the behind. In the deep part of the ocean, these distinctions of above, below, front, back, right, left become quite meaningless. You are simply in the ocean. You can turn around, and that sense of directionality is gone. And Hazrat Inayat Khan comes from a rich Sufi tradition that says, God is closer to you than the ocean is to the fish. God is closer to you than the ocean is to the fish. I want to end with also a few words about beauty. There's so much wisdom, so much beauty that we get in all different philosophical and spiritual traditions. And part of being a universal tradition, as Hazrat Inayat Khan's Sufi lineage is to be respectful, is to be appreciative, is to be engaged with the wisdom and beauty of all traditions. Wisdom is never alien to us. You recognize it, you admire it, you seek it in any expression, because light is ultimately one. And alongside that, there's also certain ways in which some of the traditions that have become quite prominent for many of us have taken on perhaps unintended consequences that leave a little bit to be desired. And one of them has to do with a certain strand of Greek thought, Neoplatonic thought in particular, that has left a huge imprint, above all on Christianity, certain forms of Christianity, but also in other Abrahamic traditions. And it's one that creates a certain dichotomy between the spirit and the flesh. And you see echoes of this, for example, in the writings of St. Paul, of Plotinus, where the body is seen as something quite lower on the evolutionary ladder, and the spirit is seen as being much closer to the divine origin. And so you hear a lot of this kind of language of the relationship of the spirit to the body is like this relationship of a bird in a cage. And the goal is to break the cage so that the bird of the spirit can soar back to its celestial origin. The Sufi tradition has a very different conception of the body, of beauty. So Hazrat Inayat Khan begins by saying, and this is a quote from him, all surrender to beauty willingly, and to power unwillingly. We all surrender to beauty willingly and to power unwillingly. In stating this, he is drawing on one of the richest insights of the Sufi tradition, in which the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, says, Inna Allaha Jameel wa yuhibbul Jamal. God is beautiful. God is beautiful, and God loves beauty. So beauty is seen as something that is divine in origin, and beauty has a magnetic pull that can pull us back closer to God. Of course, how do we come to experience beauty? Through the senses, through the body. You see beauty, you listen, you hear beauty, you taste beauty, you touch beauty, you smell beautiful scents. And so in all of those ways of engaging and receiving and processing beauty, the body is not a prison. The body is not a cage. The body is a bridge. The body is a portal. And so there has to be a way in which the senses lead us to God, in which the senses open up towards the One. And here, I think this is the last thing that I'll share with you before opening it up for questions. The contemplative tradition that Hazrat Inayat Khan offers is one that is squarely focused on the breath. Again, just as is the case with love, Sufis and Hazrat Inayat Khan do not have a monopoly on breath. We know that in the Indian context, from which Hazrat Inayat Khan comes from, Hindus, yogis, for millennia have been exploring the mysteries of the breath. And we have historical evidence going back 1,000 years of Muslim contemplatives, the Sufis, sitting side by side with yogis. There's no attempt for either of them to convert the other one. But they're asking questions about what we might call spiritual technology. And the Sufis say things like, when we take a breath in for 4 breaths and we hold it for 8 and we release it for 4, we see the color yellow. What color do you see? They're comparing their spiritual and contemplative experiences, their technology. We began this session with the mission of Hazrat Inayat Khan's teacher telling him, go west, young man, and unite the East and West through the gift of his music, your music. One of the teachings from Hazrat Inayat Khan's teacher that we have is a teaching that he gave to a young Inayat Khan, and it's simply this. There is but one sin and there is but one virtue. The one sin is to breathe being neglectful of the divine. And the one virtue is to breathe with God, with the awareness of God. Of course, when you hear a statement like that, it's hard not to be moved by it. But many of us would also say, well, yes, but what about theft? What about murder? What about genocide? What about occupation? And the answer would come that if you were breathing with God, and if you were aware that everybody else is also breathing with God, if everyone else has the breath of God within them, how could you take the life of someone that has the divine breath, the divine spirit inside of them? How would it change your understanding? Just as you yourself are love, you yourself are the lover, and you yourself are the beloved. What if you came to let go of the duality and recognize that in drawing in the breath, just as both the Bible and the Quran tell you that God has breathed his spirit into us? What if you come to realize that you are not breathing, you are being breathed by God? God is breathing through you. And even more beautifully, that the breath that you take in just a few seconds ago was mingling with the breath of everybody else in the room you're in. And before that, you're taking in the breath of leaves, the breath of puppies, the breath of butterflies, that the breath that is now inside you was floating through the leaves and the branches and the trees and the hills and the mountains and the oceans. So the contemplative tradition that Hazrat Inayat Khan offers is one in which every morning we engage in the purification of the elemental breaths. You breathe the breath of the earth. You breathe the breath of the water, the breath of fire, and the breath of air. You come to see these not only as the elements from which this world is made of, but actually of the elements that all creation, including ourselves, are made of. And in the Sufi tradition, we're told that all of these elements are made from love. And in a beautiful, sensual metaphor, that love, radical love, love is pregnant with God. That you and I and creation are quite literally the love child of God. So the contemplative tradition changes the way that we experience ourselves, creation, fellow human beings, the infinite galaxies outside and within. So I hope that can serve as a useful, very gentle introduction to the teachings of Hazrat Inayat Khan. And as I mentioned once already, it's one thing to share the teachings. It's another thing to partake of the practices together. For anyone who would be inclined and interested, I would love to invite you to join us on some of these contemplative retreats that we have. We just had the one in Morocco. The next one is in Turkey. And I put my website up there, illuminatedcourses.com. And you can see a lot of these teachings and the programs there. But I would love to pause here and see if there's questions that in the short amount of time that we have left that we can try to engage.
Süleyman kuş değilim, bir değilim. Süleyman kuş değilim, bir değilim.